Hello and welcome to SVA's webinar. We're talking today about rebuilding the career ladder for young people, and we're very pleased to have some new research into what's going on for young people in Western Sydney that we'll present to you today. I want to start though by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, part of the Great Eora Nation that encompasses Greater Western Sydney, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to any First Nations people joining us today. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So thank you so much for joining us. The program for today is, first of all, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on this piece of research that we've commissioned, and just to give you a bit of a sense of how it fits into SVA's overall work. Just making sure that, can people hear okay? Perhaps if there's a problem, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that we've had a couple of technical issues, so just bear with us if it's a bit clunky as people join in. Okay.
We're all good, Lisa.
We're all good? Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. Okay, so the agenda. So introduction to the project. Then we're going to hear about the findings from this interview research that's been done with young people in Western Sydney. We have a presentation from our two fabulous researchers who did the interviews. We'll then be joined by one of the interviewees who'll give us our reflections on this work and broader reflections on the issues we're talking about. We'll have a chance for questions and discussion, so please put any questions in the Q&A box. We will get to them, we'll monitor them. If we don't get to them in the session, we'll get to them afterwards. But please do that, because we're very keen to get your feedback. And then we'll have a little wrap up in terms of next steps and more information. This session is being recorded, and we will also distribute the slides afterwards, and you'll get some contact details for further information at the end of the project. So let me give you a bit of an idea about why SVA has commissioned this research with the kind help of City Foundation, and where we see this fitting into perhaps the broader program of activity that we're keen to see. So many of you know this, but in case you don't, one of the key issues that confronts young people in this country is that young people's incomes are going backwards. So this slide is from Productivity Report, Commission report last year, and it shows that while from 2001 to 2008, incomes went up slightly across the age groups, from 2008 to 2018, young people's incomes were declining. Why were they declining? Two key reasons the Productivity Commission identified: because many are underemployed, that is, they've got some work, but they don't have enough work, so they're looking for more, and because young people are starting off further down the career ladder and they are climbing that career ladder more slowly. What we know is that those most affected are those without university degrees. Now, there is an issue for people with university degrees as well. They're often in jobs that don't use their skills, don't use their degrees, but those without university degrees are getting shunted off the career ladder altogether or finding themselves in very marginal jobs. And despite ongoing persistent skills shortages across the economy, despite the fact that we know the future will require more skills, we see employer investment in training declining. There are fewer opportunities for young people to get a job and to acquire generic skills that will set them up for the future through that job. And those of you who are interested might want to look at the What Will It Take report that we commissioned last year, looking specifically at the employer side, what's going on the employer side. So the costs of inaction. There's a really terrific report in 2020 that the Diversity Council of Australia did, and they found that class, more than any other diversity metric that they investigated, had the greatest impact on feelings of inclusion at work. Now, what is important to note is that class intersects with other dimensions of inequality. So Aboriginality, disability, ethnic background, these things are all absolutely critical. This is not to undermine that, but they intersect with this issue of class. So social mobility is a really significant challenge that we need to face, and all employers need to consider. What are the costs of inaction on this? Poor labour productivity, lack of ability to harness this pool of talent, including talent that already exists in your organisation. Skills shortage. We've got an ageing workforce. We are not replacing skills, particularly in that middle band of skills. There's a lack of future-proofing of the workforce. If anything told us that, it's been the COVID experience, where we have lacked key critical skills across our economy. And because employers are not creating learning opportunities for young people, then we're not future-proofing. And that there is a clear link between job insecurity and mental health. So because so many young people are locked into this insecure employment, sitting at the periphery, unable to pursue their dreams or living on low incomes, we're contributing to the wider problems of mental health across the population. And of course, there's the basic issue about intergenerational inequity. So those who were born after 1975 have less prospect of moving up, of increasing their economic position than those born before. It's a basic issue of equity. This is a global challenge. It's not unique to Australia. In fact, Australia performs a lot better on social mobility than many other countries. Still, the OECD estimates that it would take 4 generations for a person born into the lowest income brackets in our country to reach the median income. What we also see, because this is a global challenge, is that across the world, employers are stepping up to do something about this. So in the United States, we see initiatives like the Higher Opportunity Coalition, employers saying we've got to do better, we've got to create better pathways for young people. And then in the UK, we've got the Employer Social Mobility Index and the work of things like the Social Mobility Commission focusing on employer action. And we think that we need something here. So we have partnered with Talent Rewire in the United States that are committed to doing work in this space and are doing really innovative work with all sorts of employers around issues around economic mobility. And this diagram represents their theory of change. And you'll see that the first thing they say is that you've got to start with understanding what is going on with those employees, with those people who are sitting in this bottom end of the workplace. What does the workplace look like for them? And from there, we can start to build a platform of practice change. We can start to prove up the business case around these things, like return on investment, look at the changes in retention, changes in wellbeing, and then we can try to scale that impact. So we are partnering with Talent Rewire to try to implement some projects in Western Sydney, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of the session. But that is the background for this research. Just quickly, why Western Sydney? So this map on the right just gives you a bit of a visual. Western Sydney, incredibly diverse, pockets of prosperity, but also pockets of great disadvantage. There are over 16,500 young people looking for work across Western Sydney. In general, in Western Sydney, it's where we see concentrations of lower incomes, higher levels of underemployment and unemployment. We've got many First Nations people. 60% of new migrants arrive into Western Sydney. Strong population growth and extreme impacts of COVID. But the other thing about Western Sydney, so it faces challenges, but it also has an enormous economy and an enormous opportunity. It's vulnerable, but the opportunity is there to build the skills to have a wonderful future. So it seems like the perfect place to start in terms of thinking about how we can rebuild career paths, contribute to social mobility in Australia. So I am going to stop there, and I'm going to invite our terrific researchers, Jacqueline Mackaway and Maria Amigo, to talk about what they found when they spoke to young people in Western Sydney as part of this project.
Sorry, everyone, 1 second.
I think now we're having a
today is not the day for technology. Okay.
Sorry about that. But thank you very much for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to share the findings from the research that we've been doing in Western Sydney. We can see the slides, Maria, if you just put them in the, there you go.
Right. Okay, thanks, Jack, for covering that. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria, and Jacqueline and I have been working on this research project, which has been really fascinating. So that's us, and we're going to share a bit of the data with you today. So the purpose of the project, as Lisa introduced, was to find out a bit more about what young people are experiencing with the job market in Western Sydney, and their experiences and feelings and expectations about their future lives in terms of career. Our target population was to look into young people who are between the ages of 17 and 24 years old, who are either working or looking for work and were not university educated. The original aim was to have 50 participants, and we wanted to have a diverse sample in terms of cultural background and gender. The recruitment was a real challenge. So we started in early October, and we finished interviewing participants by mid-February, and we only managed to get 22 people, although we had 103 people registering for the study. So it was really challenging to follow up with the people who registered, or to, many of them had committed to coming to the interview and didn't come. So it was a real challenge, and in the end, we decided to look at those fabulous 22 interviews that we achieved and that had fabulous qualitative data, and to share with you that research. So this slide shows a bit of the profile of the participants. We were lucky to have a balance in terms of gender, and a third of them had finished high school, and another third had completed some sort of further qualification as well. In terms of cultural background, we were also lucky because the sample threw at us a nice diverse range of people. We had surprisingly 25% of them coming from First Nations, and then we had 55% having been born overseas, and 40% were speaking a language other than English at home, which also shows that they were coming from a varied background. So this slide is showing a bit the profile of the interviewees in terms of work experiences, but also in terms of the sort of work that we're doing and their expectations in terms of moving into different areas. So only one person in the group had never worked. So that was interesting, because most of them, even the really young one, had some sort of experience in the labor market. 20% of them had been out of work for more than 6 months, and there were various reasons for that. Some of them were struggling to get back into the labor market, but some of them had caring responsibilities, or were studying, or had decided to make a pause and study. 60% of them had worked across 2 or more sectors, so that's quite an interesting finding as well. Not surprisingly, those sectors were retail, hospitality, and manufacturing, but with retail and hospitality being the dominant sectors. And some of them had worked across 3 or 4 different sectors as well. Around half of them reported never have been, worked in a sector that they wanted to pursue a career in, or they wanted to stay long term. So that was a relevant finding, and Jacqueline will discuss a bit more about that later on. And 2 people in the group, only 2 people in the group out of 22 said they were hoping to stay with their current employer for more than 2 years. So that's also a really significant finding in terms of how young people are seeing the career paths. But 45% had completed some sort of education, vocational training or education. So that shows us that, they had aspirations. They were trying to improve their skills and knowledge about particular areas. And 15% they were still studying. So this slide is related to the previous point. For only 15% of the people said that what they were doing at the moment was a career. And the big majority said that the job they had, if they had a job at the time of the interview, was just a job to get them by, to help them survive, but they were not seeing that as a career job. So interestingly, 30% of the interviewees had caring responsibilities. So we tend to think of young people as people who are, available and who, have time and don't have many other responsibilities. But 30% of them had caring responsibilities. Most of them were caring for children. We did interview many young mothers and many single mothers. And 17% of them were also caring for parents. So this is important for employers to bear in mind that, an important proportion of young workers may have caring responsibilities. Also, a very interesting finding is that 36% of the sample indicated that they live with a mental health condition. And this came up very clearly in the qualitative data as well. Okay, Jack, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Maria. And I'll get you to pass through the slides.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So here we've just got a summary of some of the key themes and issues that came up as we analysed the interviewees' responses. So there was this issue around respect or a lack of respect, and many interviewees implied that being young or lacking experience led to significant less consideration or recognition. It had implications for their pay, they felt, and also the care that they felt was extended to them by their employers. Another theme that came through was this undefined career plans, goals, and aspirations. There was also a theme that sat around, we've called it transition to work gaps. So things about them having limited support. These were things that hampered their ability to gain work or to keep work. So this lack of support throughout their journey seeking work. Limited or no work experience, that came up quite a bit. Being unaware of workplace etiquette. So their lack of work experience sometimes worked against them when they were pursuing jobs. A lack of training or a lack of suitable training definitely came through the data strongly. The casualisation of work presents many challenges for young people, and we'll have a bit of a chat about that. Young people were also provided some useful insights into the reasons why they leave jobs, which could be very helpful for employers to understand. But there were some wonderful stories that came through that showcase some of the success stories, things that were working to help young people find work and keep work. And we also asked young people what sort of advice did they have for employers. So we'll share those insights with you as well. So this lack of respect. What really struck Maria and I was how many of the interviewees either explicitly or implicitly described experiences that suggested a lack of respect by employers. And so we've seen this as an overarching theme, and it manifested itself in a number of different ways. And we've put some of them up here, the most prominent ones. Onerous recruitment processes and limited feedback from employers definitely came through. So we had many of the interviewees talking about how, you know, it takes a lot of time and effort to complete applications online. One young person said they put in 40 applications one weekend, and they were very frustrated not to hear back at all from an employer about whether or not they'd even received their application. There was a lack of transparency often around the job requirements. So a job ad adds, some young people identified that the essential criteria didn't always appear in the job ad. And it wasn't until they turn up to an interview to be told that, oh, sorry, you don't have a forklift license or a driver's license, that's essential. So that was something that young people found very difficult. The other thing that sometimes didn't come up in job ads was the pay rate being disclosed. And that meant sometimes young people had some very awkward conversations at interviews that they didn't feel experienced enough to handle. Pay not being commensurate with their job or their task. So a number of young people spoke that often they were being asked to do quite challenging work, and they did not feel that the pay reflected that effort or the risk that was involved. And one of the quotes there speaks to that issue, at the same time as speaking to the issue of the transparency around job pay being included in job ads. So this young participant said, you know, some being employers have been shocked that I've even asked, and I'm like, I'm not taking the job until I know what I'm getting paid. And some of them would be $24 an hour, and I was like, no, it's hard work, sorry, that doesn't make it up for me. And that was something that we saw echoed by other participants as well. A lack of proper induction was disappointing for many young people. They felt that they knew permanent staff were being inducted, and yet the casuals weren't being inducted, and they felt like they were kind of expendable, that they weren't really being treated fairly or with respect. And it also then linked to their feelings of belonging. And there were also matters around physical safety and well-being not being considered. So being asked to do things that were just too difficult physically for a young person, and really wasn't taking into account their well-being or their safety. Thanks, Maria. Undefined career plans and goals was another one that definitely came through in terms of the types of jobs young people want, or the ideas that they might have about how to progress a career. So sometimes they may start off with a clear idea, and often this emerges while they're in high school and they've got support of a careers advisor. And as this first quote indicates, sometimes that drops away though once they've left school. So once you become a student or that's dropped out, it's hard to know what to do after that. And that was something that we did hear throughout the research. Many appear to be disillusioned with how employment actually works. So as I mentioned, this effect of onerous application processes, never hearing back from employers, and not then being sure what's gone wrong. Have they not been writing good cover letters? They've got no real feedback, concrete feedback on what they could be doing better. They do have an inkling, though, that it is related to their lack of experience. Some of them just don't trust their chances of progressing into a career, and this is based on their experiences of mainly being involved in casual work to date. So, the comment is kind of, how do you get started in a career if no one will give you a job? And that was something that we heard time and time again. Often they were talking about, look, at this point, I just need a job to make ends meet. I've got bills to pay. So rather than thinking more long-term about where they might go, they weren't. They were really, it was just about sustaining themselves. Thanks, Maria. So this transition to work gaps seems to be, there are a couple of things that we've put under this umbrella that impact young people's abilities to find employment and to keep work. One of them has to do with this reduced support or no support or limited support once they leave school. And some even, sort of alluded to the fact that once they are out of school and working with employment agencies, that kind of model sometimes perpetuates this focus on just getting a job, as opposed to thinking more broadly about what a career might look like, because the agencies and the employment models are like getting you into a job, as opposed to having a more, I suppose, meaningful conversation about where you might be and how to get there. Those types of conversations that they had been having in school aren't happening anymore. There's a lack of entry-level positions in the job market, which is frustrating their efforts. Their limited work experience is again really problematic, and that came up a lot. And some were unaware of sort of some workplace etiquette that they thought maybe could be getting in the way of their chances of jobs as well. But this second quote by a young male participant, should you want to join an industry, they want you to be experienced in that industry. I don't know how to get experience if no one's going to give me a shot. And that was something we heard echoed time and time again. Sometimes the language was around, the phrase was used, it's a vicious circle. I can't get a job because I don't have experience. I can't get experience if I don't have a job. So this really played out quite prominently in the data. Thanks, Maria. Training was another thing that was really discussed frequently by the interviewees, and they saw it as essential to building their ability to perform work competently and safely. It was linked to their capacity to feel also confident and committed to an employer. And sometimes a lack of training or inadequate training left them feeling frustrated, and sometimes it resulted in them quitting a job. So this comment, one of these quotes, I had no idea what to do. I'd show up for 10 minutes, how to put a light together, and I was sort of on my own. And I had to work that out, and that was very hard. And we were sort of in a line in a warehouse, so I had to look at the person next to me, and I'd have to ask them for help. But it was also must be frustrating for them, because they're also trying to do their job. So these young people were put in these quite awkward situations sometimes, where they weren't given enough time to learn a task and master a task. They were sometimes just quickly shown and then expected to know how to do something. And they often, there were safety implications. There were social relational implications in the workplace, where sometimes, they were then having to, in the words of one respondent, was pester. I had to pester my colleague. And so it left them feeling, awkward about how to be in the workplace. And again, it linked back to this issue of feeling respected and feeling like they were valued and cared for and cared about in the workplace. Thanks, Maria. So hearing a young person say that they didn't feel like they were being allowed to grow up was pretty confronting for me as a researcher, and really sad also as a parent of young people. And these young people really associated the lack of being allowed to grow up to their inability to secure full-time employment. And this young person summed it up by saying, I still haven't really worked full-time. I'm 22 and I feel like I'm so far behind in life. And there were a few that spoke that way. Being trapped in precarious work presents many challenges for these young people, which has implications for their ability to maintain regular work and to gain qualifications to improve their prospects as well as their overall well-being. So young people were saying, you know, when I'm in this casual work, and being a young person, I'm relying on public transport. It's really hard to get to jobs when the employer rings me up an hour before a shift starts to say, can you get here in an hour? And they have to turn around and say, no, I can't. I've got to get 2 buses and a train. Sometimes I have to figure out childcare arrangements. So it made it difficult for them to actually accept work sometimes. Sometimes this casual work also made it hard for them to lock in and commit to study. So the casual work, not having regular scheduled work patterns, made it hard for them to figure out like a study timetable. What was really striking was when they talked about how exhausting it actually is to constantly be searching for work, constantly starting new jobs, so learning new skills, figuring out the social norms of a workplace, and navigating just even physically finding where a workplace was, figuring out how to get there, those sorts of things. And ultimately, this sort of stuff relies on high degrees of personal resilience to be successful, which many of these young people have in spades, while others not so much. So that does, again, disadvantage, I suppose, some young people over others. Over to you, Maria.
Thanks, Jack. So one of the questions we asked during the interviewing process was, why did you leave that last job, or why did you, leave those jobs that you were talking about? And, this slide will pull together some of the themes that Jacqueline was highlighting, because they clearly show that all these inconveniences and lack of respect and not being properly trained eventually leads to them quitting jobs. So lack of training was probably a theme in 95% of the sample. They were mentioning, I don't feel confident if they don't explain me what I have to do. I feel, I'm going to do the wrong thing, and I don't want to do that when it's a new job. So lack of training was clearly a reason for young people leaving a job. Unfair practices as well. So we heard this quite a lot as well. So in this quote, this person is saying, I did actually quit because it was a family business and there were new family members there, and I was the one doing all the work while they were on the phone and doing nothing. So obviously that feeling of unfairness was very prevalent as well. I had a couple of interviewees who were asked to do all the cleaning, whereas the older employees were not doing the cleaning. So those unfair practices, of course, they were making young people feel, I don't have to put up with this. This is unfair. I'm going to quit. Toxic work environments. This was also a prevalent theme. So environments where the mood is not right. People are shouting. They're not treating you right. That you're not being respected. No one's asking you how you're going. So that was another reason for people leaving jobs. Work health and safety was a very clear, very clear theme in the data, and we had all sorts of situations. Young people working in factories where they only had half an hour break in a 9-hour shift, for example, and they had to be standing up all the time. Or really young female workers carrying heavy loads. We had one saying, I had to carry the freezer in in that kitchen. I didn't have the strength to do that. So a lot of mention to this work health and safety, lack of work health and safety practices that were making people feel exhausted and not capable of completing those jobs and not putting up with what they were asked to do. And then non-inclusive work environments as well, when you don't feel you're part of the team, they don't feel they were not feeling they were part of the organization. No one was caring for them. No one was asking how you're going, or do you want to come for drinks after work? Just not feeling included. So these were reasons why young people were leaving jobs. But there were some encouraging stories and some, a few interviews that did have some good experiences and were staying with their employers and were very grateful for the opportunities their employers were providing. So as we said before, 36% of the sample indicated they had a mental health condition. So an employer being considerate about these or explaining things, when they were not capable of coping that day, being respectful of the fact that they were undergoing a difficult situation, that made a difference. So this young person says, I'm quite a weird person, but no one really thinks that where I work, he was meaning. They just still treat me the same as everyone else. And managers are actually really great. Then flexibility was another component of for a young person to being happy with a job, having flexibility in terms of when to start and when to finish. As we said before, many young people have other responsibilities. They study, they have children, or they have other things happening in their lives, and having that flexibility, which we all know is so important, made a big difference for a young employee. And also, having just an indication that there could be a career path for someone was a great aspect for considering staying with an employer and being optimistic and being happy in a work environment. So this young person who was working in a hairdressing salon, and she actually had never thought of this as a career path, but she had that opportunity to get into that industry. And then she said, yes, I am happy. I do feel like there is a career path here. Yes, I had a really close relationship with my manager. We got along really well. She did support me. She did help me out a lot. When it was quiet, she always showed me how to do things. So, these are easy steps that Jacqueline is going to talk about in a second, and ways that employers can care for their employees as whole people, not just as employees that come, at 9 and leave at 5, that make a huge difference in the lives of young workers. So, Jack, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Maria. Yes, actually, that was a key theme that's come across for Maria and I, this issue of thinking about young people as whole people with lives outside just the workplace. So we did ask young people what they thought employers could do generally to help sort of improve their experiences of looking for work and then keeping work. And today we're sharing some of those common suggestions that were voiced around recruitment, retention and progression. An obvious one is this, including all essential criteria in job ads. One young person said, "Oh, it just stops me wasting time turning up to interviews when I don't have a forklift license." So basic things like that. Paid work experience or a taster. There are many young people who are quite unfamiliar with some of the industries or sectors where jobs are being advertised. And so that idea of having an opportunity to go and get a little taste of what it's like to work there, they thought could be helpful. Retention, training that's appropriate for the task. And young people that we interviewed always associated training with things like feeling competent, confident, and committed to an employer. Assigning a buddy was another thing that came through a couple of times. And this is in relation to then they don't feel like they're pestering the person sitting next to them or standing next to them in the warehouse, that it's someone who's been specifically assigned and it's agreed and okay, totally acceptable then to be asking this person questions. Recognizing effort in terms of pay, the pay being fair for the task, and providing just some feedback. Young people saying, "I wish someone had just said to me, you're doing a good job." They're quite anxious about stuffing up. They want to make a good impression. They want to hang on to the job that they've got. Care. So this is linked to that other comment, checking in just to see how someone's going. You know, are you liking it? Is it okay? And then this overall acknowledging that someone is a whole person when they come to work. And some days we all have a bad day. Stuff's going on at home and we might be slightly distracted, but just acknowledging that young people do maybe have slightly more complicated lives than we think they do. And then progression. So thinking about things that might help young people progress. Well, the obvious one was permanent work. They really want secure, stable, ongoing work, and COVID has shown them how valuable that is, and that workplaces are classed places where, you know, if you are permanent, you get the perks. If you are not permanent, you don't. And as I say, COVID really showed that to them. And then the provision of career paths, just even maybe having a chat with a young person about the opportunities that might exist in a workplace. And then Maria, there was just the final slide I think we had, which was just some really interesting comments from young people about this issue of recognition and care, and also their voice on the issue of training. These were areas that they spoke frequently about during interviews. And I'll probably end with this last one, the quote in grey. You know, motivation words, like when your boss or your supervisor says, "Oh, that's good, keep up the good work," rather than saying nothing. Especially when you've just started, you know, you want to know you're doing a good job, especially because you want to know if you're doing the right thing. So they do care, they want to be cared for, and they're really keen to work. So thanks, that's sort of our part of the presentation so far.
Great, thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to now introduce David Ho. David is one of the people who participated in the study, and he's also a member of the New South Wales Youth Advisory Council, so has both an advocacy bent but also some reflections as one of the people who's participated. So David, I guess the first question for you is, you know, your thoughts about what we've heard from the research, but I guess also interested in your own experiences of when employers have either helped you along the way to get a career path or perhaps not helped you as much as you might have liked.
Yeah, I thought this was a very integrated and innovative approach in attracting and retaining young people. And from my experience, in my previous workplaces, they weren't as helpful as they could be. For example, when I was studying my diploma of logistics, I asked one of my supervisors if I could do my case studies on how to improve the lean supply chain, which their answer was no. So I do encourage, if you ever find yourself in that opportunity, to empower young people to achieve that.
But you've also had good experiences, I think.
Yes.
So I mean, I think your current workplace is pretty good. So tell us, you know, what are the things that make a workplace good? What would you say?
Yeah, so with my manager and me being someone who has a disability, I do need to have my eye drops occasionally, and I would do them usually on my breaks and lunchtime. But of course, I'll also need to do it when required as well. And not only they were just completely understanding with that, they allocated me a space in the fridge where I can put my eye drops. And I thought that was an amazing act of inclusion.
And it took you a while to find something that you were passionate about. I mean, were there things that really helped along the way, or for you to find that place for you to be?
Yeah, I really do think going and having these various experiences at different jobs and different organizations really provided the clarity of what I needed to do and where I wanted to go in my professional career.
And the other thing I know you're passionate about is about voice and young people's voices being heard by employers.
Yes.
You know, why is that important? Why should employers listen to what people say?
Because I do believe young people have a different perspective. Because if you're just going to hire the same kind of people, you're going to get the same kind of result. Where you're hiring young people with very diverse perspectives and values, you can have a wider view of a solution for problem solving or a new idea that's on the having a trend.
And have you seen that work well in practice?
I've definitely seen it worked well in practice. It really shows across with my volunteer work as well as my work in the council.
And actually, one of the other points that I think you've made is about the importance of volunteer work and recognising the value of some of the other things that young people do in their lives.
Yeah, for me, like I've been a volunteer for New South Wales Health for over 8 years now, and one of my most memorable and most noticeable projects that I worked on was this project that I advocated for. So when we were going through lockdown and going through the Zoom fatigue and all of that good stuff, I realized like, yeah, we are getting hit hard in the Southwestern Sydney local health district. So I advocated to have some resources, some vaccines to identify our most vulnerable members of our community. So people with disabilities, people of cloud background, people with mental health conditions, as well as the elderly. And I was able to engage with those vulnerable communities to support them in their decision-making process, providing them with current, accurate, and relevant information for them. So if they do want to get the vaccine, I can deploy and organize a pop-up vaccination clinic for them. So we'll be able to get our lockdown sooner rather than later, to have our freedom back, to have our lives back.
Got to say, David, that knowing that you worked for a former employer in logistics who knew that you were passionate about logistics, but they wouldn't even let you do a case study. Now having your current employer, shame on them, and your current employer is very lucky to have someone who's so passionate about pursuing a career in that industry. And I guess that's one of the things that sort of strikes me is the lost opportunity from not engaging young people's passions, giving the opportunity to show what they can do, and welcoming their voices into the discussion. Look, I'm going to ask Maria and Jacqueline to rejoin us, and we'll just have a look at some of the questions that have come through and perhaps any other discussions before we wrap. So, look, one of the questions around here that was raised was, Tony, I'm not quite sure if I've got this one right, but is there a difference between the careers and young people's thought that they were suitable for versus what they actually ended up doing? So was there a mismatch between perhaps their understanding of the workforce and where they landed or what they found?
I don't think so. In some instances, yes. Now that I stop and think a bit more, in some instances, yes. There are just jobs or industries that they're not familiar with, they haven't been exposed to, and so they can't imagine what it might be like to work there. So they'll see job ads advertised, but not really understand where that fits into, the possibilities. Others, no, they had some idea based on their social network and where their friends were working as well. And there were definitely conversations happening in those circles saying, avoid this sector, maybe try there. But that's all based obviously on their own lived experiences of,
Hey, David, sorry, I didn't mean, I thought that you might want to contribute to this discussion as well. So please feel free to, to pop back in or maybe go back to work. So I should probably let him do that if he wants to do it. Yeah, look, so other comments, one of the questions was apprenticeships and traineeships are helpful, but that they don't pay much and young people often don't complete. Do you have any thoughts about how that those opportunities could be grown in Greater Western Sydney? Can I just, just a quick reflection? I mean, what the data tells us is that the biggest reason for non-completion is the social stuff. Actually, people not being treated well by their employers, or their co-workers. A great report just out from Origin on apprenticeships and mental health. And I think what your findings reinforce is how critical those relationships with co-workers and with your immediate leader are for maintaining people in the workplace. So yeah, that was my immediate reaction, and that's what, even though pay, yes, it's important, but it's not as important as those social things.
I agree, and for many young people, you know, pay was low, and they acknowledged that, and they said, I'm starting out, you know, it's okay if I don't get a lot of money. But it was all the other things that we're mentioning that made a difference. Training, you know, being accepted, being guided, being you know, acknowledged as whole people. Those were much more important than pay. And, you know, they were the ones that were going to make a difference, and they were the aspects that were going to help young people commit to an employer as well.
Yeah. It was really interesting. Some young people said, I don't need to have a whole bunch of friends at work. Like, I have friends outside of work, but I do need to be treated professionally and respectfully. And there was one young person in particular who his experience really stood out to me, where he actually had been sort of talent spotted by a previous manager that he had, who'd gone to great lengths to create opportunities for him. And then there was a change in reporting lines, and this new manager didn't acknowledge him in the morning and say hello, didn't consult or ask, was it okay to transfer him to another office? And he said in the end, he just couldn't take it. He said it was so awful working somewhere where you weren't spoken to, you weren't consulted, that he in the end left. And this was a young person that a previous manager had spotted as someone with loads of potential. So that, you know, real shame for that employer and for that young person too.
Yeah, Jacqueline and I have been discussing that if there's one thing that we would identify within the data, that's respect. So that came up in every single interview as the theme that's, you know, the critical thing that we need to be looking at, respect, in all sorts of ways, and it's represented in every single thing that we've identified: the training, the you know, acknowledging the whole person, you know, the pay. In every single aspect, it's respect. So many young people were saying, is it because I'm younger that I need to face all these things? Why? So I had a young person who was working in a warehouse, and she said, you know, she had many colleagues doing exactly the same work, but she was the one who had to pick up all the bits, you know, the clean and do all the things, because everyone else thought, oh, she's the younger one, she should be doing all the crap work.
Look, it really struck me too, you know, listening to your findings and also, you know, talking to young people in parts of Greater Western Sydney that have been so terribly affected by COVID and the lockdowns and now some floods. Just the level of resilience and that is required simply to navigate work. And when you're talking about just the stress of starting a new job all the time, and then on top of that, we can see, you know, how many of these young people have family responsibilities. Yeah, really, just what, you know, is something that I think employers are really going to have to think about in future, is how do we support this group of young people who've really had a tough go of it for the last couple of years. Now, look, we're running out of time, so I just want to just finish up with a couple of next steps, but I'll just give you, David, Maria, and Jacqueline, the chance just to any final quick comments. Well, look, I will just then share screen again here, get my technology working. Okay, so I want to thank Maria and Jacqueline for what has been a very tough project. It went on through over the Christmas period, but perhaps more importantly, the Omicron period, and it's been very tough, and they've done an amazing amount of work, and I think really valuable findings for employers and those of us who want to help young people succeed. Thank you so much to David too. Tremendous guts, and as I said, lucky employer, and lucky New South Wales government for having him as part of their advisory panel. So as I said at the start, SVA is really keen to see some action in this area, and we think that there's a huge role for employers in creating the environments and the opportunities for young people to thrive. We have been incredibly lucky to have the support of the City Foundation to do a pilot project in Western Sydney. But on top of that, and with help of others, we are keen to pursue a broader agenda of employer mobilisation, building on work that we've been supported to do by Macquarie Group Foundation and other generous supporters. So our vision is for a mobilised network of businesses who are finding the people they need to sustain and grow their businesses, creating greater access to a wider range of high quality jobs for people that are currently excluded. And there are two key aspects to this. One is the Employer Innovation Lab. We're going to pilot one in late April in Western Sydney for organisations that are committed to creating better opportunities for young people like David and others in this study. And we will bring in lived experience and help you work with your peers to try to do something good. And then more broadly, we want to build the evidence and capacity around this issue, following on those initiatives and working in partnership with organisations trying to do this overseas. So you can support this work by participating in the Employer Lab, your organisation, your employer organisation. So we're looking for medium, large employers with a footprint in Western Sydney. We want you to work with us to build a coalition of employers who recognise the need to change practices to create opportunity. And we need investment and support to build the evidence base, build momentum for change, so that we don't lose the social mobility we've got, and that we create a better ladder for young people to escape poverty and to thrive in our economy. So contacts there, please get in touch. And I want to thank you so much for joining this webinar. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists.